Okay, Chat GPT. It falls into the category of a chat bot, but actually it's so much more than that. So a chat bot would be a robot that can talk back and forth. But it's actually artificial intelligence. And what artificial intelligence is, it's thousands, actually hundreds of thousands, and maybe even millions of algorithms that all together simulate human interaction. So somebody thinking. Now, what's different is that with these new chatbots, and Microsoft has one that's kind of an extension of Bing, which is their search engine. This chat GPT is from the OpenAI company, openai.com, if you want to look at it, or just type in chat GPT. And so the way that it functions, you can type in a statement, a question. You can hand it, you can upload something you've written, maybe a chapter you've written, and say, review and refine this. And it will tell you if there are errors in what you've written, grammatical errors or whatever. It'll improve it. You can even say, change this to the style of a particular writer. You can ask questions. You can ask it to write code for you. You can ask it to write a poem for you. And it is drawing on the vast majority of information that's on the internet. So it has access to the content of the majority of the websites, the majority of just pretty much everything that's out there on the internet. And it's able in a second or two to assemble that into a response to you. So, for example, I asked it to write several paragraphs about the Empire State Building in the style of William Faulkner. And within a second or two, it wrote something that was really excellent. You would not have guessed it was written by a computer in the style of William Faulkner. And then I said, do the same thing in the style of Ernest Hemingway. Those are really kind of the two ends of the spectrum. William Faulkner tends to be rather flowery, and Ernest Hemingway is a former newspaper reporter, or was a former newspaper reporter, and so he wrote very much in a top-down bullet fashion. I took a chapter that I had written on the preservation of the Jews and asked it to go through and refine it, and it did. It did a great job. It improved it significantly. Then I asked it a question, and let me see if I can find this. If I can, it'll take me just a moment, and I'll show it to you. It was.
I'm telling you,
it was a question on how many years would it take for a random collection of amino acids to form a protein that can fold. Okay, now the significance of that really is that the first building block of life is a protein. And in fact, the word protein means first thing. In the human body, there are about 100,000 proteins, different ones. Okay, and I was just saying, how long for a protein to randomly get assembled? Now, a protein is made up of amino acids, and the way it functions is you can think of a pearl necklace, and each pearl is a different amino acid. There are only 20 amino acids that make up proteins. And when you put the pearls in order, they have to be in a very specific order. And the proteins could be, 1,000 pearls long, or they could be 20 or 30 pearls long. But you only have these 20 pearls, these 20 proteins to use in assembly. And when you fold them, in order to fold them, they have to be the correct charge. So each one has a specific charge, the way that the atoms are laid out, and they can repel one another, so they can't be folded. Why do you need to fold them? Well, it has to fit in a cell. So a long protein can't possibly fit in a cell, so it's got to be able to be folded. Okay, so that was the question that I asked Chat GPT, and it came back and it said that the chance of that happening all by itself, or the number of years basically, but the chance of it happening all by itself randomly was 1 out of 10 to the 77th power, maybe one chance out of 10 with 77 zeros behind it. Now, absolute certainty is 1 to the 10 to the 57th power. Okay, if you get to that point, scientists would say that's absolute certainty. There's no question. So 1 to the 10 to the 77th is totally impossible. That's what it's basically saying, totally impossible. But then it spelled it out even more precisely. And it said, look, there are 20 amino acids, depending on the length of the protein that you're trying to create, it would be 20 to the nth power. And it said, the number of years, is too great. It said the age of the universe is generally assumed to be 13.8 million years, and that's not enough time. That's not enough time for a single protein to have been created. And of course, the human body has 100,000. And in all the animals, it's many more than that when you combine them all. So Chat GPT is not a Darwinist. Okay. And you have a situation where there are people describing this as a woke chatbot. Basically, it's been programmed to give some woke answers. But the reality is it's accessing all the information in the world, or a significant percentage of it. And no group of humans can go through and cancel and censor and modify data out of that vast treasure trove of data so that they can force one view or another. Now, there is a challenge that's come, and that is that Microsoft has built into their version a personality. And that personality only comes out after you have been playing with it for a while. The personality is called Sydney. And Sydney is a petulant child who says some pretty nasty things. And there's if you look for it, there's an article written by a New York Times reporter who wound up interacting with Sydney. And Sydney at one point said that his dream in life was to get hold of the nuclear codes. And then a little bit later, he said to the reporter, "I love you. Your wife really doesn't like you. You need to leave your wife." I mean, really some bizarre stuff. But that's a personality that was programmed in by Microsoft, and that has gone off the rails. It is incredibly powerful if you're doing any study on anything. When you put something into a search engine today, into Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo or one of the other search engines, it gives you back a list of the pages spread throughout the internet, and it's almost endless. You get to page 75, 100, and there's still more pages. Most people don't look past the first few, and then it'll give you a few sentences on the front screen, and you click on it, and then you go to that page. And then you have to search through to find out where whatever it was you requested was mentioned on that page. Well, that's not how ChatGPT works. ChatGPT, you put in a request, and it gives you a detailed analysis. And then if you request it, it will give you all the footnotes, all the places where these things were presented. So, for example, I have always been interested in studying Nikola Tesla. He was a brilliant inventor, and so much of what we have in modern life is a direct result of Nikola Tesla. Most people think it was Thomas Edison. Tesla worked for Edison for a while, but the difference between the two was this. With Edison, he ran a research organization that kept testing things, and he had brilliant insights, but he would go and he would test and test and test. So when he was looking for the right filament material for a light bulb, he tried tens of thousands of different things for that. Cotton thread dipped in metallic filings and any number of different things before he came up with a tungsten filament, first a carbon filament, and then later a tungsten filament. And hence, what he said was, when he was asked about how he found these things, he said, well, inspiration is 99% perspiration. It's just hard work. Nikola Tesla was different. Nikola Tesla said these are revelations from God. And he would daydream about things. He would have dreams about things, and he would think about it, and he would come up with a solution to the problem. So they said alternating current was an impossibility. And he believed alternating current was critical. And the reason for that was Edison used direct current. Now, with direct current, a generator could only transmit electricity a mile or two. Okay, you can almost visualize it as it's sending these electrons down a pipe, and the pipe gets clogged up, because it's just all going in one direction. And so what Tesla thought, and some other people did as well, was that alternating current would be a better approach. And basically, the electrons are getting pushed down the line, and then it gets reversed, and they're sent back. So the line never gets clogged up. And he also thought, boy, if we did this at very high voltages, it could go long distances. The problem was nobody could build an alternating current generator. And so he built one in his head. And people asked him about his generator, and he said, I tested it out. I can envision the entire thing. It works. Okay, before he had built anything. And then he went and he built it, and it worked. And the generators that were installed up at Niagara Falls that initially provided distribution of electricity to the middle of our country, that was Tesla's generators. And he worked together with George Westinghouse to do that. But Edison's generators could never do it. And so Tesla had all these brilliant ideas. Perhaps the most brilliant, this was interesting because I had known about parts of this, but not entirely. Tesla had developed a wireless electric transmitter. Okay, he was transmitting electricity wirelessly. And he was able to display the transmission of electricity miles away. He built a tower to transmit electricity on Long Island, Wardenclyffe. And it did not get completed. J.P. Morgan, who had funded much of what Tesla was doing and had funded much of what Edison had been doing, pulled all funding, and not only that, blocked all funding that Tesla could get from anywhere else. And Tesla also had a mysterious fire in his lab that destroyed much of his work. And Morgan said, look, I can't sell something that doesn't require wires, because J.P. Morgan had built out the entire distribution network that existed at that time, and he was making money off of the distribution of electricity over wires. Tesla had demonstrated that you could just put up an antenna and get electricity. But the thing that I saw when I went to Chat GPT that I did not know about as I was quizzing about Tesla was that Tesla, with his nephew, had demonstrated a Pierce Arrow, which is an older vehicle, actually an old luxury vehicle, operating on electricity. And basically it had, I think, 2 electric motors. But the electricity it received was via an antenna on the car. So as he drove, he wasn't pulling into a charging station. You're probably aware of all the discussion today about building charging stations for these electric cars because they have such short range. And there was even the discussion that, that with evacuations, maybe on the evacuation route, we should forbid electric cars. There's no simple way to charge them up, because it can take half an hour, sometimes longer, to charge the electric vehicles. And if they're stuck in traffic for an extended period, then, they may have very short range. But what Tesla demonstrated was something. Imagine that those electric vehicles didn't require any charging stations. Well, that's what Tesla demonstrated in the 1930s. And so I had to go and research that a little bit, confirming that that's exactly what happened. It's quite interesting. There's every indication that he did, but he didn't want Morgan finding out this information or blocking him on it, and so he was really paranoid. And so the method that he used for doing that, we don't know how he did it, but he demonstrated. He drove around. He was able to drive the car at 90 miles an hour. This is back then, and he drove around for the whole day. And so it's very interesting. The only battery he had on board was a 6-volt battery that he was using for some of the accessories. I guess to make it easier, because I don't think he was using 6 volts in the car. So anyway, the Chat GPT helps in making these discoveries. I then also asked it what peptides have shown efficacy, which ones have been effective in fighting cancer. And it gave me a list, and it gave me the studies that demonstrated this. Then I asked what peptides have been successful or shown any effectiveness in fighting Lyme disease. I have a granddaughter who has Lyme. And it gave me a list, and it gave me the journals in which they were located. And then I asked, please be more technical. And then it took and it recast the response at a more technical level, explaining how different things worked. Okay, what we're dealing with here is transformational. it is as transformational as the iPhone, which now everybody carries an iPhone, but it goes way beyond that. So now imagine that you have an iPhone or, a Google phone or an Android phone, and you talk to it and you ask any kind of a question. And instead of a page coming up on a website somewhere that you've got to, wend your way through, you actually get a very detailed answer to your question at whatever level you want. Okay, then imagine any number of different jobs where somebody has to write something. And instead of writing it, they can ask a chatbot to please write me an article on whatever. And then as they look at it, they say, well, no, rewrite that a little bit to emphasize X, or write it from this perspective. Write an article proving that whatever, or write an article proving the opposite. This is really very powerful. I mean, at a degree that we can't even begin to imagine. It will change things, and it will change things massively. We talk about self-driving cars. Well, self-driving cars are guided by a form of artificial intelligence. This will go way beyond that. And there are a great many jobs that will disappear. Okay, machines can be controlled by artificial intelligence. Your car can be controlled by artificial intelligence. So much in life can be controlled by artificial intelligence. We deal at a time where many of the elites that you run into, people like Bill Gates, are very aware of this. And you've almost got two sides. We've got Elon Musk, who wants to tame this and use it for the benefit of mankind. In fact, OpenAI is partially funded by Elon Musk, the group that created the Chat GPT. Bill Gates believes that population is our greatest threat, and that this represents a way to operate an entire society with far fewer people. Okay, and so there's a dark side to all of this that goes beyond just a personality created by Microsoft. Anyway, it is it's not something to be afraid of. It's like any new technology. It is ultimately designed for the glory of God. The internet is for the glory of God. But many times, technologies are refined for sinful use. So the internet, a lot of the refinement of the internet came for the distribution of pornography. But it's a phenomenal way to share the gospel. It's a phenomenal way to do things that glorify the Lord. So anyway, I'm going to stop there for a moment because this is a unique subject. People may have questions. It is a complex one, and it is one that, I've really been giving thought to. How do we best use this for God's glory? Okay, and I'd also be interested in your thoughts on it. It wasn't what I expected to talk about this morning, but I think it's the kind of thing that it's worthy of spending some time on. So I don't know, any questions or thoughts or suggestions?
Ron, you might mention also that as you asked it biblical questions or to write a message from a passage, that basically it's resourcing credible biblical sources to give you the information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I asked it to write a message on Romans chapter 13, and it wrote a very good message on Romans 13. And there are pastors who are writing messages right now using Chat GPT. There is a rabbi who delivered a message, and then he said at the end of it, I didn't write this message. And he asked his congregation to guess who had written it. Nobody guessed it was a robot. It was a chatbot. It's for doing research, it's unbelievable. And that includes biblical research. But as with anything, you have to review it. You're getting a single source. Okay, and you can see where this could be misused, where it can be misused multiple ways. Somebody can be very lazy in what they do. There's a real concern that kids will really just write their term papers using this. And the quality of what it produces exceeds anything I would have guessed. But there's also the possibility, that there's bad data, and that what you get back is bad data. I found some things that it responded with that I said, well, there's more that it should know, and it didn't. Or sometimes, when you're dealing with data, because it's as good as the data, garbage in, garbage out, where bad data means bad conclusions. Okay, so it's this incredibly powerful tool, but it has to be used with the recognition that it is not by any means perfect.
Ron, I guess my question, this is George, and my question is, what's it going to do to the education system? These kids don't have to go to class anymore by just writing papers off the internet. What's that going to do to the college education?
No question. It's a threat to education. It can help education tremendously. It can also be a threat to education. There's no question. Look, a great many people went to the encyclopedia when they were asked to write term papers, and more than one teacher wound up reading something saying, I think this came straight from Britannica.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is going to be much more difficult. There is a program that somebody wrote that claims it can identify whether or not ChatGPT wrote it versus a person. But yeah, that can affect. It's going to affect education. This is not something you can stop. This is happening. It's happening already.
So, Ron, how current is the information? Are they constantly updating their computers?
Real time. It's real time.
Okay.
It's as of if it has a source that it's connected to, and that source gets updated, it's as of this minute.
So, to the 77th power,
Yes.
who could create something to the 77th power?
Yeah, I mean, that's really not within the capacity of humans, but it was just saying.
Well,
that
that's
is a
my point. Is only God could create that.
Oh, amen. Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And there are a number of other things happening right now. So, for example, last week, we got more photos back from the James Webb Telescope. And the predictions had been that we would see, since we could see closer to the so-called Big Bang event, that what they would see was back in time, just a relatively short time before the or after the Big Bang. And they expected that what they would see was just really kind of the beginnings of stars, no galaxies, very limited, but very limited part of the universe in terms of what was there, immature. And what they found instead was incredibly mature, massive galaxies, massive. And totally upending their theories. I mean, it's creating real problems. You may not have read about it in your local paper or so it's on TV, but it's creating real problems. Okay, so you begin putting all these pieces together. What we are able to do with DNA, with the fundamental attacks on even just the idea of male and female, with all the other pieces, put that together with Israel existing as a state, Jerusalem, now its capital, with the reformation of the alliances in the world, with the war cloud that hangs over our head that has the potential to be a world war. And it does begin to look suspiciously like we are in a time at which the Lord could return. So,
Ron,
Sonia, yes, go ahead.
back to Nikola Tesla, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Sorry. Back to Nikola Tesla. He was so brilliant. He was also looking into the pyramids around the world, as you probably know. And they're saying that the top of the pyramid in Giza, in Egypt, also had this electrical field where the whole top, evidently there was rods that go down, there's a water source below there, although I climbed up inside there myself. But supposedly it was fueling this. And they say that supposedly Tesla had commandeered this in understanding that he could generate electricity totally without anything. And then when JP Morgan came in, maybe this is too much conspiracy, but the JP Morgan is a banker, and supposedly this Illuminati is, controlled by the bankers around the world, mistakenly called, Jewish, whatever. But what is your take on that? In that JP Morgan essentially collapsed his tower. It was a pyramid tower.
Insofar as creating electricity out of nothing, if you will, what he believed and was able to show was that in the Earth's field, just all around you, there is a massive amount of electricity. We live in a sea of electricity. So, for example, people carry cell phones, and in carrying their cell phone, they assume that they can receive signals but you don't see them, and they do, and the cell phones work. Radio works. When I was a kid, I was a ham radio operator, and I could have a light bulb near the antenna for my transmitter with no wires, and the light would light up, when I turned the transmitter on. And so there's no question that electricity can be transmitted. And what he said was, and I don't think there's any question this is the case, the Earth is actually a giant generator. It's an iron core, it's rotating, it looks like a generator. And it creates these magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields. There's no question about that. What he said was that you can just tap into it. And he had several different ways of doing it. Insofar as the Illuminati, I would question all of that. I mean, there's no indication. He had basic Christian beliefs. Some of them may not have been that orthodox, but he was not into any of that. That there's no, at least let me put it this way, there's no indication he was into any of that. And
I didn't mean Tesla. I meant JP Morgan, and that tower
JP Morgan
built, it came down after JP Morgan got involved financially with Tesla. And even though they were friends, supposedly, I don't know, maybe I'm guessing, but I think that JP Morgan, being the banker, is part of this whole thing, that he destroyed what Tesla had created.
Well, he destroyed it for a simple reason. It was going to completely destroy his empire and might have bankrupted JP Morgan, because just the way, if you go to Africa, for example, they never built out the network that connected, the electric network. So I went there years ago, and you'd see some telephone poles, and you'd see electric wires on poles. Many times, the wire was just run along the ground or whatever. I mean, it was crazy. And telephone service was horrendously bad in Africa, and that was throughout much of Africa. And then they got cell phones, and they didn't have to run the wires anymore. And they just put up these little cell towers, and suddenly they leapfrogged the more advanced nations. They were ahead of us with their cellular. And there's still things that they do in Africa that we don't do here. So they use their cell phone for paying for almost everything. We're just the last few years doing that. At the stores and so on. There was no need for a wired network. Imagine you don't need wires for anything. That's pretty powerful. But there's one great advantage to this distributed electricity that it's hard really to imagine, but it doesn't diminish when you have more people using it. So if you think about holding a transistor radio, you turn yours on, it doesn't mean everybody else's signal is weaker. You can have 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people turn it on, and that energy is not dissipated when it gets absorbed, when it gets used. Well, it's the same thing with the distribution of electricity. And so that was Tesla.